My father humiliated me at his retirement gala until my husband exposed his $5 million secret. You'd think after 36 years of being someone's daughter, you'd know where you stand with them. Turns out, a stage, a microphone, and a room full of donors can change everything. I should have stayed home. I told Matteo that a dozen times on the drive to the Westwood Country Club, but he just held my hand on the gear shift, gave me that calm look of his and said, "You're his daughter. You belong in that room." Turns out, he was wrong, I didn't. I was never supposed to be in that room. My father, Arturo Morales, was retiring after 35 years as the superintendent of Westlake County Schools. He built the district from what he always called collection of crumbling cafeterias and part-time teachers into a nationally ranked system, private donors, magnet programs, new campuses named after civil rights icons. He was by many measures a local legend, and if you asked him, he'd tell you he did it all for the children. But that night at his retirement gala, I realized I was never one of those children. Not really. We arrived late. Mateo's suit was too big in the shoulders, mine too tight around the hips. I'd borrowed it from my friend Soledad. My father's new wife, Lynette, the third one, had sent the invitation 2 weeks before. No RSVP required. Just a printed card that said, "Please arrive no later than 6:30 p.m. formal attire. Program begins promptly at 7. It was 6:49 when we pulled into the valet line. The first red flag? The doorman looked at our names and asked us to wait a moment. The second? He whispered into a walkie-talkie before letting us through. By the time we stepped into the ballroom, the lights had dimmed and a massive slideshow of my father's career played on a screen behind the stage. I recognized none of the faces. We slipped into a table at the back. Not a single person turned around. Not even when the speaker, Lynette's daughter, Sydney, began her toast, Sydney. 28, freshly minted law degree, and the daughter my father always wished he had. My stepfather believed in me from the moment I said I wanted to pursue law. When I graduated, he was the first to shake my hand. He said, "You make this family proud." That's the thing about Arturo. He knows what pride really means. I stared at my champagne glass, untouched. Mateo's hand brushed my thigh under the table. He leaned in. "Are you okay?" I nodded and lied. Fine. But inside, something cracked. When it was time for my father to speak, the ballroom lit up like a cathedral. He stood under a halo of light, his silver hair gleaming, microphone in hand. They say legacy is what you leave behind, but I believe legacy is who carries it forward. He gestured toward Sydney, who smiled with closed lips. Perfectly practiced, this family is in good hands. Polite applause. Soft violin music swelled under his words. There's one thing I've always said as superintendent. Standards matter, excellence matters. You cannot build greatness without making hard choices. He scanned the room, and then his eyes landed on me. Sometimes, family teaches you what not to do, what you cannot accept, what you must rise above. The applause faded. His voice sharpened. It's not enough to show up. You must earn your place. And some people, no matter how long you wait, never rise to the occasion. That's not legacy. That's dead weight. Gasps. Laughter from a corner table. I think someone even clapped. Mateo sat up straighter, jaw clenched. My face went cold. Then a voice crackled over the ballroom's PA. "Security, please escort the woman in the back. Brown dress, gold earrings, table 22. It was my father's voice. My name wasn't said, but I didn't need it to be. Every eye turned toward me. And just like that, I was 15 again, standing outside his office, holding a math test I'd failed, knowing I wouldn't be getting dinner that night. 2 guards appeared beside me, soft-voiced, polite, but firm. "Ma'am, please. We need to speak with you outside." I didn't move. My heart pounded so loudly it blurred the music, the whispers, the camera flashes. Mateo stood. "She's his daughter." The taller guard looked at his earpiece, nodded once. We were told to ask her to leave. People were filming. My father hadn't said a word. He simply looked away, like I didn't exist. Mateo put a hand on my lower back. "We're leaving," he said quietly, but not to me. To them. I wanted to sink into the carpet. We reached the doors, my eyes glued to the floor. I barely registered the crystal chandeliers above or the soft-spoken apologies of the staff, but I felt it. Every stare, every whisper, every moment of disbelief from the crowd as the disgraced daughter was ushered out. Then, just before the doors closed behind us, Mateo turned around. He didn't say anything, just looked at my father across the ballroom, and something shifted in his face, something I'd never seen. He looked like a man who was done being polite. The car ride home was silent for 6 full minutes. Then Mateo pulled over, cut the engine, and said, "I can't let this go." I shook my head. "It's fine. It's not. He's always been like this. He doesn't want me around, I get it. I'm not Sydney. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't win anything. You're a teacher, Elena. You raised kids that aren't even yours. You buy crayons with your own money. You tutor failing students on weekends. You belong in that room more than anyone." I let out a bitter laugh. That's not how my father sees it. Mateo stared straight ahead. Then he said something that chilled me. Maybe it's time people saw him. He made 3 phone calls that night. One to a former student of mine, now a tech reporter, one to a friend in finance, and one I didn't hear, because he stepped outside. When he came back in, he said, "Go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be different." I didn't believe him. I'd learned a long time ago that people like my father always win. They wear suits and smile for donors and cut ribbons at charter school openings, and when they shame their own children, they call it tough love. I went to bed with mascara on my pillow. I woke up to a headline. Exclusive. Superintendent Arturo Morales used student fund to pay stepdaughter's law tuition. Breaking story by Camila Torres, WXN News. My phone blew up. Soledad called. My principal called. Even my mother, who hadn't spoken to me since the wedding, called. I didn't answer any of them. I just stared at the screen while Mateo poured coffee. "Is this what you did?" I whispered. He nodded once. "I thought you were in insurance, I am," he said. "But before that, I was an analyst for the Department of Education. Fraud Division." I blinked. "You never told me that." He handed me a flash drive. Because I never thought I'd need to use it. What followed in the next 48 hours could fill an entire novel, $5.2 million in redirected educational grants, 4 shell nonprofits, 1 rigged scholarship program benefiting exactly 1 law student, Sydney Lynn Talbot. The donors, furious. The school board, panicked, and my father, silent. Until he wasn't. He released a statement. "These are politically motivated accusations rooted in personal vendettas. I have dedicated my life to public education. My legacy speaks for itself." But the cameras had already turned on him. The Gala footage, me being escorted out, had gone viral. Under it, people commented, "Is this the teacher he shamed? She's the only one with integrity. Fire him. Investigate everything." I wanted to disappear, but Mateo had one more surprise. He turned on the TV and pointed. "Watch this." A press conference, dozens of mics, my old district logo behind the podium, and then my father. He looked 20 years older than he had 2 nights ago, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear on his face. "I am stepping down, effective immediately." The room gasped, "And I will be cooperating fully with the investigation into financial mismanagement." He didn't look up once, didn't say my name, didn't apologize, but it didn't matter, because for the first time in my life, I was no longer carrying his shame. At the bottom of the article, they used a stock photo of me teaching, my arms open in front of a whiteboard, kids raising their hands. Underneath, it said, "Elena Morales, the daughter he disavowed, is a 3rd-grade teacher in the same district he claimed to build." She declined to comment, but her husband confirmed she will continue teaching. "She doesn't care about legacies," he said. "She cares about kids. And maybe, just maybe, that's all I ever wanted to be." The morning after the headline broke, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were swollen. My curls were frizzy. I looked like someone who hadn't slept, eaten, or breathed correctly since the gala, which was true. But underneath all that, something else had shifted. Something I couldn't name yet, a kind of weightlessness, not freedom, not pride, just the absence of a lifelong heaviness I'd never even realized I carried, and it scared me almost as much as it relieved me. The district responds. By 10 a.m., the district issued a statement. We are saddened by the allegations against former Superintendent Arturo Morales. We stand with our educators. I read it twice, then 3 more times, not because I needed clarification, but because no one in my entire life had stood with me like that teachers messaged me, my childhood neighbor messaged me. Parents of kids I'd taught years ago posted supportive comments online. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt exposed, like everyone now saw the cracks in my family I'd worked my whole adult life to cover. Back to class. When I arrived at my school that Monday, the front desk staff hugged me before I made it to my classroom. Elena, mija, we're with you, Mrs. Ortiz said, squeezing my hand so tight my fingers tingled. But the moment I stepped into room 12, everything else fell away. 23 kids, paint-stained desks, the smell of cheap markers and instant ramen. My real life, my real identity, my safe place. They didn't care about scandals. They cared about snack time and whose turn it was to feed the class gecko. Still, a ripple passed through the room. Miss Morales, one of my students, whispered, twisting her braid nervously, "Are you okay?" It was the purest question I'd heard in days. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm okay." Not entirely true, but truer than I'd expected. The media storm. Every local news outlet wanted an interview. I said no to all of them, but it didn't stop reporters from showing up at the school parking lot or outside my apartment building. Mateo handled it. He had a way of weaving past cameras like he'd trained for it, even shielding me with his body, his jacket, his briefcase, whatever he had on hand. He never raised his voice. He never snapped, just quietly blocked them. When we finally got upstairs one night after dodging reporters, he closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. "This is getting worse," I said. He shook his head. "This is the middle of the storm. It'll get worse before it gets better. But it will get better. Are you sure?" He nodded. "Yes." I wanted to ask him how he could be so calm when my entire world was collapsing and rebuilding at the same time. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. He had seen this before, seen people in power crash, seen victims blamed, seen truth used like a flashlight. He had lived this world before I ever knew him. My father calls it happened on a Wednesday. I was grading spelling quizzes when my phone buzzed unknown number. I wouldn't have answered. I never answer unknown numbers. But I picked up anyway. "Elena?" It was my father. His voice sounded off, thin, raspy, almost unsure. I froze at my desk. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "I asked your mother." "So, she's alive," I muttered, unable to stop myself. He ignored the jab. "Elena, I need to speak with you. In person." "No? Elena, please, why? So you can humiliate me again? Disown me again? Call me a disappointment for being a teacher?" His breath hitched. "I never said you were a disappointment. You said I was an embarrassment." Silence. Long enough to tell me he remembered, and longer still to tell me he regretted it. "Elena," he whispered, voice cracking. "Please, I need your help." Something in me flinched. Old instinct, old programming, old wounds. "I can't," I said, "not anymore." And I hung up. My hand shook, then my whole body. I leaned over my desk and sobbed, quietly, into my sleeve so my students wouldn't hear. For the first time in my life, I had said no to my father, and it felt like ripping out a rib. The investigation gets bigger. 2 days later, federal investigators arrived, not at my home, at his. The news exploded. Federal Education Fraud Bureau, now investigating former Superintendent Arturo Morales. $5.2 million may be only the beginning. Audit suggests additional misappropriations. Stepdaughter received over $180,000 through questionable scholarship fund. Sydney disappeared from social media. Lynette issued a statement claiming she had no knowledge of any wrongdoing, despite bank transfers showing her signature on several documents. My father went silent, completely silent. At my mother's house, my mother, his first wife, called me again. "Elena, mija, come over." Por favor, I did, mostly because I didn't have the energy to argue. Her apartment smelled like Cafe Bustelo and lemon cleaner, exactly as it had when I was little. She hugged me when I walked in. A long hug. Longer than I expected. "He's scared," she said, pulling back to look at me. "I'm not responsible for his feelings, I know, but he is still your father. He never acted like it." She didn't argue. Instead, she sat me down, poured coffee, and said, "He keeps asking for you, I know. Are you going to see him?" "No." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "Good. Not until you're ready." It was the first time in my life she'd ever sided with me against him, the funeral that wasn't a funeral. 2 weeks later, the school board held a community healing event, which was code for, "We're trying to fix the PR disaster without acknowledging any blame speeches were given." Donors apologized to the educators of this great district, parents hugged teachers, students held signs saying, "We believe in our teachers." For the first time in 36 years, the district saw teachers as the heroes and administrators as the question marks. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt numb, until a former student approached me. "Miss Morales?" It took me a moment to recognize her, tall now, confident, wearing a college sweatshirt. "Alyssa?" I whispered. She nodded. I saw everything on the news. I just wanted to say, "You're the reason I didn't drop out in 9th grade. You're the only teacher who believed in me." My throat tightened. "You always had it in you," I whispered. She shook her head. "No, you put it there." I cried then, not because of my father, because of her, and because for the first time in a long time, I remembered why I chose this life, the breaking point. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. Mateo and I were watching TV when a knock rattled the door. A frantic knock. Urgent, I froze. "That's him," I whispered. Mateo nodded grimly. "I know." He opened the door. My father stood there, drenched, shaking, eyes red. Like a man who'd lost every battle he thought he'd already won, "Elena," he choked out. "Please." He took a step inside. Mateo blocked him. "You don't get to come in here unless she says you can." My father's jaw trembled. "Elena," he begged, "I don't want money. I don't want forgiveness. I just need you to listen." I swallowed hard. My whole body shook with conflict. Rage fighting grief, resentment fighting compassion, daughter fighting adult. Finally, I nodded once. Mateo stepped aside. My father collapsed into the nearest chair. "The truth." He looked smaller, frailer, older. "Elena," he whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you. You did. I know." He wiped his eyes, hands trembling. "I was hard on you because you reminded me of myself." I laughed, a raw, cracked sound. "You hated yourself that much?" "No," he said quietly. "I loved education more." And suddenly, it clicked. The reason he pushed me, ignored me, dismissed me, not because I was unworthy, but because I chose a path he believed was beneath his legacy. "I spent my whole life chasing greatness," he said, "but you found it without ever chasing it." I froze. He looked up, eyes wet. "You are everything I wish I had been, everything I should have valued." A tear slid down his cheek. "I was proud of you, I just never said it." That broke me. Something long buried twisted free, painful and liberating. I whispered, "Why did you humiliate me at the gala?" He buried his face in his hands. "Because I knew the investigation was coming. I knew the walls were closing in. I knew donors were questioning the funds. And I saw you walk in and—" His voice cracked. "You reminded me of what I'd destroyed, what I'd lost. Me. He meant me. I couldn't face you," he whispered. "So I pushed you away, like a coward." We sat in silence. Rain pattered against the windows. He looked so broken, so human. For the first time in my life, I saw not the legend, not the superintendent, just the man, my father. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to shrink. The goodbye. He didn't stay long. He wasn't allowed to. Investigators were monitoring him, he said. Before he left, he turned to Matteo. You protected her, he said. Matteo nodded once. I love her. My father's throat bobbed. Take care of her, he whispered. Then, to me, I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you live free of the shame I put on you. He stepped into the hallway, paused, and said the last words I ever heard from him. You are my legacy, Elena. The door closed. And that was it. We never saw him again. The aftermath. He pled guilty 2 months later. Got 18 months in a minimum security facility. Most of the stolen scholarship funds were recovered. Sydney attempted to distance herself, but the investigation found her signature on enough documents to open a separate civil case. Lynette filed for divorce. The district rebuilt. The donors doubled their contributions to restore faith. And me? I returned to my life, my kids, my classroom, my small apartment with Matteo. No reporters, no cameras, no legacies, just chalk dust, construction paper, and 23 noisy little humans who argued about whose turn it was to water the spider plant. Finally, it felt like breathing again. One final letter. 6 months after the last court hearing, I received an envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, in my father's handwriting. Elena, I've rewritten my will. The educational grant funds, rightfully returned, will now support students in your school, not mine. I finally understand. Legacy is not what you build, it is who you love, and you were the only thing I ever got right. Papa. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not for him, but for the little girl inside me who'd waited 36 years to hear, something like that. Epilogue, a new beginning. A year later, my class received the first installment of the Morales Teacher Support Grant. New books, new instruments, new art supplies, free breakfast for every kid. Parents cried when they heard the news. Teachers hugged each other. No one knew where the money came from. Except me. And I didn't tell them. Because the story wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about the kids. My kids. My legacy. Not my father's. Mine. Matteo held my hand as the kids tore open boxes of new supplies, squealing with joy. Are you okay? He whispered. For the first time in a long time, I smiled without hesitation. Yes, I said. I finally am.